It's one small step for man.
It's been over 50 years since the first moonwalk, and with each passing year, America's fascination with space intensifies.
Liftoff on Apollo 11.
But what if the public wasn't told the whole story?
There really appears to be two NASAs. You got the public version of NASA, and then there's the private version, the secret version.
Could our government and NASA be working on top-secret programs involving the moon?
I have been assured that something's going on the moon.
And even Mars.
Mars really is the best candidate for creating another Earth-like world.
Is it possible that there is something even more dangerous that they are trying to hide?
Buzz Aldrin made a statement that 3 days into their voyage to the moon, the crew saw an unidentified object following them.
And what happens when the truth about outer space is finally revealed?
Okay, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
July 20th, 1969. Apollo 11's lunar module lands on the surface of the moon.
Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
6 hours after the Apollo 11 lunar module landed on the moon, Neil Armstrong stepped out, walked down the ladder, and became the first human being to set foot on the moon.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The moment is broadcast live to a worldwide audience. 19 minutes later, Buzz Aldrin joins Neil Armstrong on the lunar surface.
Beautiful view. Isn't that something? Magnificent sight out here.
Armstrong and Aldrin spend approximately 2.5 hours collecting rock samples and reporting their observations back to NASA.
Within those 2.5 hours, there were actually 2 minutes of missing transmissions, which NASA blamed on an overheated camera.
Although the broadcast was considered live, the truth is NASA had a very extensive transfer system where the signals were received in Australia, sent across the oceans, went through multiple computers. Anywhere along that line, they could have gone in and edited out things they didn't want people to hear, cut off things they didn't want people to see, and changed it rather than from a live broadcast into a sort of pre-planned, almost scripted, delayed broadcast.
Did something happen during these crucial 2 minutes that NASA did not want the American public to see or hear?
Hundreds of ham radio operators who had their own high-frequency receiving equipment were able to hear the actual live uncensored audio feed between NASA and the astronauts.
And what they picked up was very eerie.
Can you see that? Apollo 11, Houston, do you have a little white dot?
So NASA asks what's there, and moments later, Apollo comes back with, "These babies are huge, sir, they're enormous." Things like, "Oh my God, I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out there lined up on the far side of the crater edge. They're on the moon watching us." Isn't it really interesting that this is what took place during those missing 2 minutes?
That's about all we can make out.
This is incredible. A record of 2 astronauts openly discussing possible extraterrestrial spacecrafts. And we're not talking just one light in the sky here. There are multiple ships parked right there observing their actions.
I couldn't even begin to imagine how Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin felt encountering such craft on the moon. This had to be the most awe-inspiring and maybe frightening thing that they probably had ever seen.
This supposed sighting by the crew of Apollo 11 has never been officially acknowledged by NASA, but it is just one of many strange observations reported on the surface of the moon. July 21st, 1969. Tranquility Base, the moon. Hundreds of amateur ham radio operators pick up a censored transmission from Apollo 11, reporting the sighting of multiple UFOs on the lunar surface.
In 1979, Maurice Chatelain, former chief of NASA Communications Systems, confirmed that Neil Armstrong had switched over to the medical channel to make that statement.
This switching in communications to another line makes a lot of sense because all the astronauts had a private line directly to their personal doctors where they could talk about things that they didn't want the general public to hear.
According to the files, Apollo 11 had 2 more strange encounters during their mission. Many believe they were being monitored by some otherworldly presence.
The Science Digest published a story from astronomer-author James Mullaney in July of 1977. The crew of Apollo 11, during the first moon landing, reported that their capsule was paced by what appeared to be a mass of intelligent energy.
This is really astounding. A mass of intelligent energy? These are actual astronauts openly discussing an encounter with some kind of inhuman entity.
About 4 decades after the Apollo landings, Buzz Aldrin made a statement that 3 days into their voyage to the moon, the crew saw an unidentified object following them. So they called back to NASA and asked if that could possibly be the booster rocket that they had jettisoned 2 days earlier. And the reply from NASA was that the position's not even close.
Later in the mission, another unidentified object is observed by Apollo 11's crew.
As the Apollo lunar module was descending toward the moon, Buzz Aldrin had a 16mm camera, and he recorded a white, kind of shimmering, fast-moving object that seemed to be trailing the lunar module itself. Now, what's interesting is that at the same time in the command module, Michael Collins reported the same phenomenon.
Columbia, this is Houston. Go ahead, over.
I did see a suspiciously small white object.
Go ahead with the coordinates on the small white object.
It's right on the southwest rim of a crater. I think they would know it if they were in such a location. It's on the southwest wall of a smallish crater.
Astronauts are among the most credible witnesses you could ask for. And here they are, reporting that they're seeing things on the moon. This is testimony that you really have to stop and consider.
Between all of the exchanges that occurred between the Apollo 11 astronauts and NASA, it's impossible to conclude anything other than that they encountered UFOs while on the moon. But the unanswered questions still are, what were these UFOs doing up there? And were they monitoring the Apollo 11 mission?
This absolutely appears to me that they are watching and monitoring our progress. I can't imagine that the extraterrestrials would be surprised that we would come there at some point. In fact, if you look at the account, they seem to shadow the mission. And then when the Apollo crew lands, they're there. They're in very close proximity.
It's also interesting to point out that when Neil and Buzz were landing the lunar module, they didn't even land in the area they were supposed to. They landed in this rocky area, and they almost ran out of fuel by overshooting their intended landing site. This leads me to believe they might have landed in this other area purposely because they were looking for something.
Attempts to investigate Apollo 11's original transmissions hit a dead end.
If you're looking for those original tapes of the Apollo 11 moon landing, NASA claims that the original tapes are lost. And what that means is that nobody will ever be able to see what really happened there, and nobody will be able to recreate or understand what Neil and Buzz actually saw on the lunar surface.
It's a sad reality that for way too many people, the excuse of losing these priceless tapes is enough. The government knows this, and they count on the public being appeased by the flimsiest of excuses, which is exactly why we need to speak out and keep the pressure on the powers that be.
Even decades later in 2019, UFO enthusiasts claimed that NASA once again altered a live feed of astronauts working on the International Space Station as an alien object hid in the background.
Apollo 11, Houston, do you have a little white dot?
The Apollo 11 mission is obviously of world historical importance, but I also think that it was, in part at least, designed to find out what or who was on the moon.
Did Apollo 11 encounter the first real evidence of an extraterrestrial presence on the moon? And if so, why hide that fact from the public? According to UFO files, there are claims that the Apollo 11 crew witnessed unusual objects on the moon. One man may hold the key to this mystery.
My name is Karl Wolfe. In 1966, I was working at the 44th Reconnaissance Technical Group at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. I was an electronics technician, electronics photographic repairman.
Karl Wolfe got a call that some workers at a secure lab facility needed help. Their special printer wasn't working, and they needed someone to come down and fix it.
I was the only airman second class with a cryptologic security clearance. My boss said, "Oh, I would like you to go over to the NSA and take a look at this piece of equipment." At the time, I thought he was missaying NASA, because I did not know what NSA was. This is where they're taking in the images from the lunar orbiter.
From 1966 to 1967, NASA launched 5 lunar orbital spacecraft around the moon, taking photographs, looking for possible landing sites for the Apollo missions.
Karl Wolfe arrives at the lab where the lunar orbiter photographs are processed. He senses that something is not right.
They took me into the facility. We went into the dark room. It was lit with red lighting. There was a single airman in the dark room.
Karl Wolfe and the airman strike up a conversation.
We walked to the far side of the room, and there was some images over there, and he pulled one out. But before he pulled it out, he said, "By the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon." And I thought, oh my God, this kid is giving me information he shouldn't be giving me. And I'm a little concerned if somebody walks in here now that we're both in jeopardy, because there's a huge breach of security.
Can you imagine hearing this kind of news? This was way before we had even landed on the moon. And now we find out that someone or something already has bases there. And this wasn't just something that Karl Wolfe heard. He saw an actual photograph too.
Karl Wolfe recalls being shocked by what he saw in that classified photo.
I saw these huge structures, domed and spherical buildings, what appeared to be towers. Some of them reminded me a little bit of radar domes or something of that nature. They were massive structures. When I said, "Whose base is it?" he didn't have a chance to answer. The door opened shortly after that, and he didn't respond. He wouldn't have known anyway, I don't think, any more than anybody knew.
Is it possible that Karl Wolfe actually saw a base on the moon in that photograph?
5 lunar orbiter spacecraft were sent to the moon to gather photos of possible landing areas for the Apollo missions. And it's really no surprise to me that they might have found something else.
Those images were not sent initially to NASA. They were sent to the NSA, who studied them for their own intelligence purposes. And we have to ask ourselves, why would the NSA be looking at them before NASA unless they assumed or had reason to wonder if somebody else was on the moon?
I've actually interviewed quite a few people, and I have been assured that something's going on the moon that we're not being told about. And when you look and when you dig far enough, you can find pictures of the moon in which certain things appear to have been airbrushed out.
Even in 2019, decades after Karl Wolfe's experience, there are those who claim to have evidence that more than 100 alien bases exist on the moon.
Richard Hoagland, a lunar artifact specialist, claims that NASA has doctored photos of the lunar surface. Some objects on the lunar surface can't be identified as natural geologic formations, as they're of complex organizational and geometrical structure. Richard claims that as of now, different unexplained artifacts have been discovered in 44 regions of the moon.
There are those who believe that NASA had two objectives when they sent astronauts to the moon. One, the public was aware of, and another, they were not.
There really appears to be basically two NASAs. You got the public version of NASA, which we all know about, and then there's the private version, the secret version. And that appears to be an organization using NASA as a cover, collecting artifacts and any other kind of data relating to other intelligences that may be on the moon.
If there really are secret bases on the moon, what are they for, and who is operating them? Over the course of NASA's extensive history, there have been reports of secret bases on the moon. If this is true, are they occupied by extraterrestrials who are monitoring us from afar? The idea may not be as outrageous as it sounds. December 17th, 1972. Menlo Park, California.
At the time that the final Apollo mission, Apollo 17, was leaving Earth on its way to the moon, a man named Ingo Swann was at the Stanford Research Institute in California having a meeting with scientists and the CIA.
The CIA is interested in Ingo Swann, a leading researcher in the field of parapsychology, for his alleged abilities as a remote viewer.
This is a phenomenon where certain people claim to have the ability to be able to see things, almost like an out-of-body experience, where they can go to remote places and either look at objects or other people and report on these things. It's pretty well known that the CIA and the Soviet Union were involved with these kinds of experiments, because if you can find someone who can go out of their body to help you locate enemy submarines, for example, what a blessed gift that would be to the military.
Ingo Swann passes the CIA's tests with flying colors.
All of this made Ingo Swann kind of a covert superstar in the remote viewing world. So he gets a phone call that says, look, we have an important situation here. We would really like your help.
A couple of days later, Ingo Swann is picked up in an unmarked car, and a mask is placed over his face so he won't know where he's going. He arrives in what appears to be an underground base and is escorted to a small room. He is then told to wait.
The blindfold is removed, and here is Ingo Swann standing face to face with a man who describes himself as Mr. Axelrod. Axelrod essentially lays it out to Ingo Swann. He says, look, I'm going to have you remote view these 6 coordinates on the moon. He starts describing what he sees on the moon. He sees what seem like bridges or roads. He sees structures, buildings.
He saw towers and domes. He saw concrete and possibly glass. I find it interesting that both Karl Wolfe and Ingo reported seeing the exact same structures, but have never met each other.
This can be a little difficult to swallow. Sure, there have been studies on remote viewing, but does it count as real proof of bases on the moon? And Swann's claims go even further than just moon structures.
He also sees beings or people on the moon. When he sees them noticing him, he gets very scared and he says, they're seeing me. And Axelrod says, come away from there very quickly. And they end that session.
Ingo Swann is shaken by his experience.
Ingo says, what was that all about? Axelrod doesn't answer. Ingo Swann keeps asking more questions. Well, wait a minute, is this do we have like a secret base, or do the Russians have a secret base on the moon? Still no answer. Ingo Swann says, wait a minute, am I supposed to believe that there's the presence of some other group on the moon? And Axelrod says, pretty interesting, huh?
Axel walks out, and the next day, Ingo is sent back home.
Ingo Swann never hears from the individual called Axelrod again.
The question is, who and what was Axelrod? Axelrod never, ever told Ingo Swann just what agency he belonged to. Well, one possibility is that he was just one more element of the labyrinthine structure of the U.S. intelligence community.
Did Ingo Swann really view extraterrestrial activity on the moon? Or could it have been a lunar base built by the U.S. military?
Long before we even landed on the moon, back in 1960, the Army Ballistic Missile Agency developed a program that would establish a military outpost on the moon. They called it Project Horizon.
So this permanent military outpost was predicted to cost $6 billion, which was an enormous amount of money at that time, and we hadn't even gotten anybody into space yet. But the idea was to have it operational by 1966 with 12 soldier astronauts based on the moon.
Why would the government feel it necessary to have a secret military base on the moon?
Lieutenant General Arthur Trudeau wrote a letter to President Eisenhower stating that the lunar outpost is required to develop and protect potential United States interests on the moon and to serve as a base for further exploration into space.
Some believe that the moon's natural minerals may one day be essential for Earth's survival.
The main minerals on the moon are oxygen, iron, calcium. You can imagine as we run out here on the Earth, the moon would be a place we'd want to get those minerals from. But the big challenge to these is there's a huge energy cost to getting stuff there that can do the mining and then bringing it back. So a much more likely application would be settle and colonize the solar system.
UFO files reveal that bases on the moon might be just a first step towards larger space colonization. For many UFO researchers, America's missions to the moon may have had both a public as well as a secret agenda. Some believe it was to establish our own lunar base. If there are in fact hidden bases on the moon, could they be just one part of an even greater mission to explore other planets?
Randy Cramer's story might be the most incredible thing I've ever heard. It's way out there, and I honestly don't know what to make of it.
While Randy Cramer's claims cannot be verified, he has shared his account for 10 years, and the details always remain consistent.
My name is Randy Cramer. I was born and raised in Eugene, Oregon. Had what most people would just consider a very normal, regular, working class American life, really, to be honest.
But in November 1987, at the age of 17, Randy Cramer's normal life takes a shocking turn.
According to Randy Cramer, he is awakened in the middle of the night by an intense light in his room. It almost looks like a glowing doorway, and something is coming out of it.
Two men, dressed all in black, emerge from the light and pull Randy Cramer from his bed.
He doesn't fight them because he feels like he might be dreaming, and then they take him back through this portal.
I was taken to a base, an underground facility, I believe, where we were rallied around a big black triangular craft.
Randy's recollection of a triangular ship actually matches the description of a craft on file. It's known as the TR-3B.
The TR-3B is an alleged black budget vehicle. It definitely mimics the form, fit, and function of what we know as UFOs. Regarding the performance capability of the TR-3B, we're talking at least Mach 15.
Cramer is led onto the triangular craft, along with other young men and women.
The plane comes down, and there were maybe 40 or 50 of us total at that location that got on board. I didn't really know what was happening at the moment. I knew something different was happening. So that was kind of exciting, actually, because at that point, oh, we're going somewhere.
In my own research, I've come across a number of cases that are rather similar to what we hear with the Cramer case. That is of people as children being taken by sometimes very exotic means to places where they were tested for various abilities and so on.
You have to question if this actually happened to Randy Cramer, or was it all just a dream?
But what Randy Cramer reports happening next feels all too real.
The captain of the ship said, for now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a last look at the planet. And then the ceiling became a view screen, like the whole ceiling visually disappeared, and we were looking right out into space and right at the Earth, right in front of us. So he basically says, take a look, take a nice long look. This is what you're fighting for. This was home. And that whatever we were going out there to fight or do, it was to protect and keep the people on our home safe.
2 hours later, the captain announces that they're about to land at a place called Command Base Luna, on the far side of the moon.
As we came around to the dark side and got close, you could see some, like, domes, a couple of tall buildings. Some of these towers were something that was closer to a 50 or 100-story building. And these things are huge.
Could these be the same structures described by Ingo Swann in his remote viewing session? The ship lands, and Randy Cramer is taken to one of the buildings, where he is briefed on why he has been chosen.
Randy was told that he was going to be serving mankind by protecting secret human colonies off-planet.
You're put into the program for a certain genetic distinction that makes you likely to be better at what they want you to be and do.
According to Randy Cramer, this mission is part of a top-secret planetary defense initiative.
They pulled out the contract that we were going to be under, and we were signing and explaining, this is the beginning of your 20-year tour. So I didn't know whether I had something to look forward to or be anxious about.
20 years? So now he's not just in training, he's in some kind of interplanetary defense unit on the moon.
But the moon isn't Cramer's only stop. Inside UFO Files is the story of Randy Cramer, a man who claims to have been transported off planet Earth at age 17 as part of a classified space defense project. But what could be the purpose of such a massive secret initiative?
According to Cramer's story, he's been selected as part of a super soldier program. This means he's going to be genetically enhanced and specially trained for very important missions.
The idea of a super soldier sounds crazy or fantastic to some people. It's actually very credible. There's the agency known as DARPA, that's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Right now, DARPA is already talking about their interest and ability at some point to help soldiers regrow limbs through gene therapy, if you can imagine that, or to go for extended periods of time without sleep. All of this is out in the open. So what can they do secretly? What have they been able to do on the clandestine side of things?
Here's Randy Cramer learning that he's been drafted into a super soldier program after just being flown to the moon on a UFO. But the moon is just the first stop on his journey. Things are about to get a lot stranger.
Randy Cramer reports that he is transferred to a new spacecraft that brings him to a second destination.
The captain of the ship says, "Okay, everyone, welcome to Mars."
The ship touches down on the surface of the red planet.
When I stepped off, it was clear to me that it was very real as I was feeling this breeze on my face as I felt the sun, but I had to touch it. I had to reach down and touch it. So the first thing I did was reach down and scoop up a hand of dust and sand in my hand.
Let's say this is all true. What's the end game? What would be the purpose of building a secret military force on Mars? Well, according to some, the future of humanity might depend on it.
Is Mars being colonized to one day replace our own planet? In 2019, reports claim that scientists were in fact researching ways to make Mars habitable for human life.
Mars really is the best candidate that we have in the entire solar system for creating another Earth-like world. I think the evidence is pretty overwhelming that Mars at one time was Earth-like. Most of the atmosphere of Mars now is carbon dioxide, which is a great energy source to grow plants. We could actually start to colonize the planet Mars without really having to do anything more than send a bunch of plants up there.
Was Randy Cramer's mission intended to prepare the way for an eventual exodus into space?
This is an amazing story, yet there appears to be evidence that backs up some of these assertions. But according to Randy Cramer, the most incredible thing about his story might be how it all ends.
After allegedly spending nearly 2 decades on Mars, Cramer claims he was teleported back into his childhood bedroom, returned to his 17-year-old self.
So when I was returned 15 minutes after I left, I woke up the next day. I felt older, as I was, but I didn't look older, because I didn't.
If you go somewhere, say, for 17 years, and have a way to travel back to Earth, and now you're at Earth only minutes later than the time you left, that's really traveling back in time. One of the theoretical ways you can actually accomplish time travel is through a wormhole, because wormholes are these structures that are tubes that connect 2 different parts of space and time. So you can imagine connecting one part of space that's at this particular time to another part of space that's a time in the past.
Upon his return, Randy Cramer initially has no memory of his interstellar experiences.
I woke up the next morning, with those memories suppressed, and they're gonna come out eventually. I tried every option that I could in order to understand, why do I feel this way, and how do I get through it? I tell people it was a 20-year tour, and it was a 20-year healing process. A solid 10 years of just getting to the point of now I'm starting to remember who I am, where I was, and what I did.
Randy's story is naturally difficult for many to accept. On one hand, there's scientific support for some of his claims, but on the other hand, much of it is theoretical and not really proven, like the ability to travel through wormholes. I find the whole tale fascinating, and I guess at the end of the day, we each have to decide on our own whether this is truth, fiction, or something in between.
If these claims are true, and human colonies already exist on Mars, where on Earth is this program originating? UFO investigators have uncovered evidence of secret off-planet military installations, including the testimony of Randy Cramer, who claims to have been part of a covert defense initiative based on the Moon and Mars.
There were maybe 40 or 50 of us total at that location that got on board. They said, this is the beginning of your 20-year tour.
If the U.S. actually has interplanetary bases, how are all these troops being transported into outer space without anyone noticing?
The answer might be found at a military base that some call the New Area 51 and Ground Zero for off-planet expeditions. January 26th, 2011. Fred Collins is driving past Dugway Proving Ground, an Army base in Tooele County, Utah. Something catches his eye.
Fred looks up and sees unusual triangle-looking lights in the sky. He stops his truck on the remote road to get a closer look, and all of a sudden, the military base's alarm system goes off. Collins watches the triangle craft circling, and then all of a sudden, he sees this beam of light hit the base.
Collins tries to get a closer look at the strange activity, but is interrupted by approaching vehicles.
Collins quickly goes back into his pickup truck and steps on the gas. He assumes they're military vehicles that don't want him around.
The military vehicles pursue Collins until he is far from the base, at which point they drop back, leaving him to wonder what he just witnessed.
The next day, Collins is expecting to see something about the strange lights on the news, but there's nothing. Instead, the news report says that the base was on a 12-hour lockdown due to a missing vial of nerve gas.
The Army admitted to a lockdown, but how likely is it that a vial of nerve gas went missing at the exact moment a civilian happened to see something unusual flying over the base? And this isn't the first time strange lights have been spotted over Dugway.
We have many reports on file of unidentified objects flying around the base. Bright lights zipping up into the sky, and also rumors of secret underground bases.
There are rumors of these triangles being spotted going all the way back to the 1960s. This is a place that routinely has objects visible in the sky.
The design of these craft flying over Dugway is interesting because it's the same kind of craft that Randy Cramer described taking him into space. On top of that, Dugway Proving Ground is in the perfect location for a secret spaceport.
Not only is it absolutely immense in area, but it's surrounded by mountains. Its airspace is completely restricted, even up above the Earth's atmosphere. Furthermore, many defense contractors are at Dugway working on black budget programs.
Could Dugway Proving Ground be a secret spaceport hiding in plain sight? Some believe that this program could eventually be the key to our salvation.
Look around. There are clues all around us about how fragile our planet is. Global warming, rising oceans, rampant wildfires, killer hurricanes, threats of war all across the globe, nuclear meltdowns. Perhaps this secret push into deep space is all in preparation for doomsday. If that's the case, maybe we should be happy that someone's been thinking ahead.
Reports of interplanetary travel and secret space bases on the Moon and Mars might sound too fantastical to believe.
If this is real, that changes everything. Life as we know it changes dramatically.
But despite the incredible nature of these stories, there is strong evidence that some of these claims may be true and is hidden from the public.
I mean, how much are they keeping from us about what's really going on up there?
Perhaps for there to be any hope of discovering the truth about outer space, the public must demand the truth.